So scholars only have very limited conceptual tools to engage with today's diverse and very complex urban worlds. And the workshop today invites actually to revisit, rethink, and add to the most widely used concepts in critical urban studies. And my attention was grabbed by something the organizer wrote in the call, where I read this sentence. What seems to go amiss in current debates is a consideration of the theoretical basis formed through a broader abstract discussion. Well, this inspired me actually to take a step back and ask a very basic question. And I want to share with you, and it's the question, what are concepts actually for? What do we as urban scholars need concepts for? And for me, actually, I understand concepts as tools that help me to do my work. And I gathered some points, what they do help me to do. And of course, these points are not limited to these, what I write here, but these are like, for me, the main things a concept has to do for me. So concepts help to understand rapid transformations of urban landscapes. They do facilitate discussions and common understandings of urbanization. They create awareness of multi-scaled urban transformations. Concepts also address difference and unequal power relations in the production of urban space. Concepts help to engage with urban worlds otherwise. And concepts also help to imagine different urban futures, the urban yet to come. I believe building open and revisable concepts of urbanization that speak to these points I gathered here is necessarily a collaborative work and actually a main goal of urban scholarship. A more open-ended and experimental approach is more established in the invention of methodological approaches and tools. What you actually also had as a topic in a workshop before. But I argue that it's also key to advance theoretical conceptualizations in critical urban studies. In this opening session, I would like to share some thoughts about such collaborative conceptual experimentations as a way to expand the vocabulary of urbanization. As an example, I will draw on our experience in the framework of a comparative research project with the title Patterns and Pathways of Planetary Urbanization, where I worked together with this team. I want to name them Naomi Hanakata, Pascal Kallenberger, Ozan Karaman, Anne Kockelkorn, Lindsay Sawyer, Christian Schmid, and Tammy Kit-Ping-Wong. The project was conducted at the ETH Future City Lab in Singapore and here at the ETH Zurich. The goal of this research project was to detect and develop new concepts of urbanization through the comparison of urbanization processes in 8 large metropolitan territories across the world. The case studies were Tokyo and the East Pearl River Delta with Hong Kong, Shenzhen, Dongguan, Kolkata, Istanbul, Lagos, Paris, Mexico City, and Los Angeles. Inspired by concepts from southern experiences such as occupancy urbanism or peripheral urbanization, among others, we developed a series of concepts like, for example, popular urbanization, plotting urbanism, mass housing urbanization, or incorporation of urban differences, allowing a more nuanced and detailed analysis of these urban territories. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go into the details of all these concepts, but you see during my presentation, you see pictures where I present some of these concepts and some of these processes we were studying. I will reflect on our approach of how we developed these concepts. And to make it very clear right now, this comparison and its resulting concepts are by necessity incomplete and partial and form only one of many other possible starting points for the development of an enriched, enhanced and revisable urban vocabulary. To reflect on our approach to collaborative conceptual experimentations, how I call it, I will first briefly discuss shortcomings and difficulties in some of the most well-established concepts of urbanization. And as I believe that you already this morning touched upon the first points I listed here, I would really like to jump directly and focus to some tactics and strategies we have seen how scholars work with concepts. And there is this tactic of conceptual stretching. This we see, for example, in the concept of gentrification, where the original definition is relaxed to encompass more and more cases until the concept itself becomes almost a generic label. Another strategy is the strategy of homogenizing. This becomes especially clear with the concept of suburbanization, also a process-based concept in urban studies. Suburbanization has become a kind of a passepartout applied to all kinds of urban developments, taking place beyond the confines of a relatively dense urban core. So suburbanization and gentrification are examples of umbrella terms, and the processes they describe are increasingly blurred. This leads us to a paradoxical situation. While these terms are stretched to encompass more and more cases or singularities, they become at the same time fuzzy and lose much of their explanatory capacity. Such conceptual limitations present in today's critical urban studies not only reduce the complexity, simplify explanations and mislead interpretations of urban worlds, they also restrict the imagination, reduce the inventiveness towards new terms, and inhibit an open approach to experimental conceptualizations. So against this background of current debates, I will now briefly introduce the approach we developed in our comparative project. Based on the concept of planetary urbanization, we were interested in understanding urbanization processes and not only urban forms to address the expanding scale and increasing complexity of urban transformation in our case studies. Based on post-colonial and decolonial critique, we aimed to decentralize and further pluralize urban knowledge production. This implies both to engage empirically with places and everyday knowledges of people, as well as to engage theoretically with scholarship proposing concepts of urbanization in languages others than the Anglophone canon offers. Also, two topics in the series of these workshops were addressed. Obviously, building concepts with a wider reach involves a moment of generalization, moving beyond singularities. Our goal in the project was to detect a bundling of characteristics, common underlying mechanisms, logics, regularities, and common traits in the way urbanization unfolds and proceeds, thus producing similar outcomes. We conceptualized urbanization processes through a comparative and collaborative approach. In this way, it was possible to identify a common problematic across different times and places and the various divides that separate them. The aim was thus to develop a comparative analysis to apprehend the general tendencies of urbanization and at the same time to address the specificities developing in each urban territory. To close, I would like to recapitulate some of the main challenges concerning concept building, and I would like to invite you to further discuss them with me today in this afternoon. Concepts that help to grasp the complexity of urbanization processes need to both generalize and differentiate between diverse processes. Our comparative project did therefore not search for overall similarities across different kinds of settlements, but we sought to identify specific urbanization processes and to reveal their distinct logics. Instead of widening, we therefore narrowed down the scope of our concept to identify systematic differences between various urbanization processes. To consider the specificity of urban territories and to analyze concrete processes and manifestations of the urban on the ground, this is crucial. With a decenter perspective, valuable starting points for theory generation and conceptual innovation for urban studies can be found everywhere, but always somewhere. This also means that spatial units of analysis have to be reconsidered. Urbanization processes do not simply unfold within fixed or stable urban containers, but actively produce, unsettle, and rework urban territories, and thus constantly engender new urban configurations. The essential task, therefore, is less to distinguish new urban forms than to investigate the historically and geographically specific dynamics of urbanization processes. It is necessary to diversify the sources in urban theory and to enrich our language with a wider palette of terms better representing the manifold emerging urban situations and urban processes. The goal is, of course, not to develop a unifying language, but on the contrary, the goal is to collaboratively work on an enriched vocabulary, because that enables a differentiated view of the world that helps to better understand the dynamics of urbanization and also to facilitate exchange and debates in an increasingly multilingual critical urban studies. This last point puts also questions of translation and untranslatability center stage. And here again, it becomes very clear that rethinking theory always is about shifting practice. With this, I close and give back to Mine